lot to unpack here. But just focusing in on the interesting and difficult verse 8 here.
Can I ask a question? So is it possible, based on dating of Jeremiah and Job, for him to be borrowing?
Yeah. So a lot of people think Job is like the earliest book in the Bible, right? And that's incorrect for a couple of reasons. It gets spurred on, I think, because of Leviathan. Right. And people think that God is describing dinosaurs or something in chapter 40. But there's sort of this Leviathan in the Bible, and then an extra biblical text is sort of like a mythological beast. Of course, we have really clear categories of myth and reality, and those are much more blurred in the ancient world. Leviathan is, I always compare him to like the Loch Ness Monster for those people who believe in the Loch Ness Monster. Okay. Really out there. But experience with that creature is limited, but really out there and really dangerous. But anyway, so a lot of people will date Job early because of our like scientific, we found these animals in the ground, it must be the dinosaur. Well, there was no writing or recorded history from the age of the dinosaurs, but other clues that it's late is it's just the language itself, and it has some Persian era. So like maybe it could, some people would date it to the time of the exile, like the middle of the 6th century, and others would push it back to the 5th century or even later. So it's more likely than that you'd be borrowing from Jeremiah. Okay. Good question. So I'm curious about the translations you have. Can somebody read verse 8 for us and tell us what translation you have? Okay, and then Wadzi, and then how about somebody on Zoom, and then Matt. Okay, we'll have 3 translations.
So I have ESV.
The ESV, okay.
Okay. Let those curse it who curse the day, who are ready to rouse up Leviathan. Okay. And Wadzi?
Mine's similar, it's NASB, and it says, let those curse it who curse the day, who are prepared to rouse Leviathan. Okay. Matt, do you have anything different?
Yeah. Let those who are experts at cursing, those who are ready to rouse the sea monster. And it's the New Living Translation.
Okay, so the second line calls Leviathan the sea monster, and the first line doesn't have day in it, right?
It has it afterward, curse the day, after
right.
Sea monster.
In the New Living Translation, though?
Yeah.
What? I didn't hear day. It does have day?
Yeah, the sea monster, and then hyphen curse the day.
Oh, okay, okay. Does anybody have anything different? Any like NRSVs out there, or?
The Message.
Yeah. All right, well, I have the NRSV. Let me read you the NRSV, and you guys tell me what, if you hear any differences. Let those curse it who curse the sea, those who are skilled to rouse Leviathan. So what's different?
The sea.
The sea. Are they cursing the sea, or are they cursing the day? Right? So there's 2 Hebrew words. You guys ready for some Hebrew? Yes. In the Masoretic text, the text that like all of your English Bibles are essentially using, it has yom, which is the word for day. So, and it makes good sense that Job he is cursing his day, and he's calling others, we'll talk about who the others are, to be curse his day as well, right? So those who are cursers of the day, let them curse my day, was essentially what he's saying. And that's in the Hebrew, but there is another variant upon this that is, the word for sea is yam. So you hear the differences, or the similarities, and even yam and yom, it's just a matter of a vowel. And even in the ancient world, they may have said these essentially the same way, yam. So there's either a wordplay here, but the NRSV decides yam, sea, because Leviathan is a sea creature. So the parallel leads to it. So there's kind of debate about whether it's day or sea, or maybe there's like double entendre, right? The author doesn't tell us, but maybe it means both. I like the interpretation of cursors of day. Let me show you one picture from, this is an Egyptian picture, and in this we have this sea snake, right? And this is, so in Egyptian lore, you have the god Re, who travels during the day, he travels over the horizon, right, giving light to everyone. And at night, he works his way back through the underworld into the place where the sun rises. And so, and when he's going through the underworld, he encounters this snake-like creature. And every night, he's defeating the serpent of chaos. And so, he's the sun deity, the deity of the day, but he's also, traveling through the underworld at night. So maybe what's going on in this text, not to say that like Job is borrowing from this, but they're part of the ancient context, that you have those who curse the day. So there are cursers of the day, namely, in the second line, those who are skilled, or the word here is also like the mighty ones. It's used in a couple of other texts for those who are in the underworld, like heroes of long ago who have died and gone down to Sheol. What's that?
Is that similar to Genesis 6?
It is similar. It doesn't use that word there.
Okay, different word. Okay.
There's another text in Isaiah 14 that kind of uses this word. It's the same idea of those who are in the underworld.
Okay.
And what Job is doing here, I think, is calling upon them. They are also the cursers of the day, those who are like in the underworld. And it's either they're calling on them to rouse up Leviathan, the beast of chaos, to overtake the light. That makes good sense. It might also be calling upon Leviathan to rouse up the cursers of the day, to curse the day. There's different ways to take this. Leviathan himself comes up in Psalm 74 and Isaiah 27. Let's just look really quickly at Isaiah 27. And we probably need to try to draw it to a close, so I want to give time for any questions. But at the very beginning of Isaiah 27, the first verse, somebody have that? Watsy, go ahead.
Just verse 1?
Yeah, just verse 1.
In that day the Lord will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, with his fierce and great and mighty sword, even Leviathan, the twisted serpent, and he will kill the dragon who lives in the sea. Okay.
So this is kind of almost an apocalyptic type of text. Actually, this comes up in Revelation, the dragon and the sea, all this stuff. All this is really important for understanding what's going on in Revelation. But Leviathan, and in Psalm 74, there's this narrative kind of hanging out there in Israel's context of when God created the world, he defeated chaos. And he uses battle imagery in Psalm 74 and Isaiah 27, and even the Leviathan of Job 3 seems to be calling upon this, like this creature that causes destruction, anti-creation, God's enemy, and he lives in the sea. But God defeated this sea monster when he created the order of the world. He put everything in its right place. He split the sea. Even the crossing of the Red Sea is kind of this image of bringing up dry land, creating a place of safety, and defeating the power of the sea. So whenever you see the sea in the Old Testament, think chaos. And in the New Testament, for that matter, when Jesus calms the sea, he's overcoming chaos. It's not just a really awesome, miraculous thing. It's bigger than that. It's putting down the power of chaos. But what Job is doing is calling upon that power of chaos. I mean, this is super extreme, and to overtake the good creation of what God's done. Okay, questions or comments?
You assume this is like normal language of the day? Just this would be
No.
No?
So when people say that Job is just like lamenting like the laments of the Psalms, I think he's going one more.
Okay.
He does do that, but he's evoking darkness, and in a way that we don't see even in like Psalm 88, the kind of I am in deep darkness. What we'll see in Job is saying, you're responsible for this, God. You're shooting me with poison arrows. I mean, God is the one who's, and Job is not always consistent. That's important. Like any person who's suffering, it's not like he's a systematic theologian here. He's just saying what's on his mind. And one of the great lessons of the book of Job is that God can handle that. Even if he's not right all the time about what he's saying, he is right in chapter 42, verse 7 and 8. when God says to Eliphaz, "You have not spoken rightly about me, like my servant Job has." So there's this kind of, I think Job's right in maintaining his integrity. He's speaking what he really feels. And he keeps on talking to God. The friends never talk to God. But Job keeps on talking to God. And even if what he has to say is not like good theology, it's honest. And that, to me, like the big takeaway from the book of Job. Reed, I saw your hand.
Yeah. How does this interact with Genesis 1, verse 21, where it talks about God creating the sea creatures?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's another text in Psalm 104 that has Leviathan himself, but there's another word for, this is one thing I love about the Old Testament. There's a word for, that sometimes gets translated dragon, right? There's dragons in the Old Testament. It's the same word that in Genesis 1:21 that has sea creature, the sea monster. It's the word tanin. And it's like a general category of which Leviathan is sort of the prototypical character. But of course in Genesis, this creature is good, right? The heart of good, God's good, orderly creation among the other fish. We're going to have a lot of description of Leviathan in God's speech. So how does what God says about Leviathan push back, or I think we could say the same thing about the sea monster, push back against how Job imagines God's relationship with chaos? And a lot of people would say once you get to God's speech, it's sort of like he just ignores Job. And there is an element to that, but I do think if we read it closely and look at like how God describes entities that people associate with chaos, like the predatory lion, let's say. God says, I feed the lion. Whenever the lion comes up in the dialogue, it's always an enemy of God. And God says, that's not my enemy. I mean, it's sort of like, he does the same thing with Leviathan. The tanin, the sea monster, comes up in chapter 7, verse 12, and Job says, why are you putting your guard over me like you do the sea monster? In other words, why are you treating me like your enemy? And what God seems to say is, not so much, I'm not treating you like my enemy, as much as saying, hey, those things aren't my enemy. And he sort of reframes Job's suffering. And there's a lot to say about the divine speeches and how it responds. But I think God's speech sounds more like Genesis 1 or Psalm 104, where Job is kind of taking up the description of Leviathan like we have in Psalm 74 or in Isaiah 27, this kind of mortal enemy of God's. Let me say one more thing, because I can't help it. I think there's this issue in Job that does relate to him being able to speak his mind, and also just the experience of suffering. And I'm not a grief counselor, but if you hit your thumb with a hammer, right, all you can think about is your thumb. That's about all you focus on then, right? You're not thinking about anybody else. You're thinking, the whole world has come crashing down. And I think that's where Job is in the extreme. Right? He's in such deep suffering, he can't see straight, and we shouldn't expect him to see straight. I mean, what he's saying, I think we need to kind of authenticate, even if we don't really agree with, like the friends don't agree with the theology of Job, and God himself doesn't really agree with it. But I think there is this real element to letting people say what they want in those moments and just sitting with them still. Thanks for the conversation. See ya in wisdom literature.